Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back, Regents. Also like to welcome Regent Shields, who wasn't able to join us this morning. Afternoon, Tom. The next item on our agenda is to hear from President Riley on the 2008-9 operating budget. Kevin?
Thank you, President Bradley. As we all know, the June meeting of the Board of Regents each year marks an important decision for the Board regarding our annual operating budget. I know that you, as Regents, have the utmost concern for keeping undergraduate and graduate tuition affordable, and so do we. I know you also care deeply about the quality of educational programs and student services the UW system can and should provide for our students statewide, and so do we. As we talk about the 08-09 annual budget, I'd like to remind board members that we're talking about the second year of the 2007-2009 biennial budget. As such, the topic before us, the 08-09 budget, is a reflection of our ongoing commitment to the growth agenda for Wisconsin. Before lunch, we talked about our intensified efforts to increase need-based financial aid as a part of the agenda moving forward. Let's remind ourselves of the great progress the growth agenda has already made, with lots of leaders statewide endorsing our efforts to enroll and retain more students, produce more college graduates, and invigorate the development of high-growth industries across the state. Our campuses and the communities they serve have enthusiastically rolled up their sleeves to implement a number of initiatives aimed at advancing this plan. There remain a number of challenges, however, as we work to balance the momentum of the growth agenda with significant state budget shortfalls. Those financial challenges include a $25 million lapse in the current biennium and another $25 million lapse in the 2009-11 biennium, all part of the original state budget passed last year. Additionally, the recently passed budget repair bill will soon require the UW system to absorb some portion of the $270 million lapse that all state agencies are asked to be part of. We're working with the governor and the legislature to ensure, we hope, the most reasonable reduction, the highest degree of flexibility in the way that reduction is implemented. If the reduction turns out to be reasonable and flexible, we hope to be able to avoid pulling back on the growth agenda. The legislature also recently revised a previously approved pay plan for UW system faculty, academic staff, and non-represented classified staff. The original pay plan approved last year would have provided for a 2% pay plan increase this July and a 1% increase in April 2009. The revised plan now provides a 1% pay raise in July 2008, this July, and a 2% increase in June 2009. So they kind of flipped the paradigm from 2 up front and 1 later to 1 up front and 2 later. That delay in our pay plan amounts really to a cut, further exacerbating the serious compensation competitiveness problem we have with our pay packages and compensation packages for faculty and staff. I will address this very major issue with you in my President's report tomorrow morning. Our fuller understanding of the broad fiscal picture must also include the significant impact of the Veterans Tuition Remission Program. This remarkable program is a key component of Wisconsin's educational vitality, a worthwhile way for us to recognize and support our veterans. Growth in this tuition remission program is excellent news in one sense then for our veterans and for the state. Participation in the Veterans Tuition Remission Program has nearly tripled since 2005. However, state funding has not kept pace with this wave. We must make the Veterans Tuition Remission Program part of our operating budget discussion on behalf of those veterans and on behalf of our other students. With less than 25% of those estimated costs covered in the current state budget for the UW system, veterans remissions is a major fiscal challenge and a big part of today's tuition recommendation. Our campuses have been diligent and committed to managing all of these challenges, holding positions vacant for longer periods of time, delaying purchases, reducing travel, reallocating funds where appropriate. So I want to extend my gratitude to our chancellors and provosts and faculty and staff across the system who remain dedicated to the advancement of our educational mission, even in the face of these significant obstacles. As regents, you all have a difficult role in balancing the many interest groups that are heavily invested in Wisconsin's higher education, including students, staff, faculty, and also taxpayers. The impact of a successful growth agenda depends on our ability to vigilantly manage our resources while maintaining access to UW's world-class institutions. With the state's current fiscal uncertainty, we must make prudent decisions about our operating budget and the best way to keep the growth agenda moving forward. So with that said, I am recommending the following to this board for approval. A tuition increase for resident undergraduate students of 5.5%. This mirrors the modest 5.5% approved last year, which at that time was the lowest percent increase in 7 years. Even with this proposed increase, UW-Madison's tuition would remain the second lowest among the Big Ten universities. Tuition at UW-Madison under this recommendation would rise by $348 annually, at UW-Milwaukee by $340 annually, and at the comprehensive campuses by $265 annually. Of the funds generated from this increase, a portion is mandate-based. The pay plan and health insurance costs and utilities for the system's 59 million square feet of facilities are items obviously we cannot just choose not to fund. Together, those mandates amount to 0.7% of the 5.5% increase. We hope on a one-time basis, 3% of the increase would be dedicated to partially fund the state-mandated Veterans Tuition Remission Program, which I just mentioned. We're strongly in favor of subsidizing university education for our veterans in recognition of their service to our country. These veteran students have served and in increasing numbers now have fought and been injured to protect all of us, not just other UW students and their families. I know that all of us as taxpayers would be proud to have a portion of our taxes support veterans' efforts to get a higher education. That's the wonderful way it worked after World War II, and that's the way it should work now for veterans returning from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We certainly hope that the state honors its current crop of Wisconsin veterans in the future by fully funding the remission of their tuition with state general purpose revenue that we all contribute to as taxpayers. Tomorrow, as part of the biennial budget discussion for 2009-11, looking forward to the next biennium, you'll be asked to approve a resolution, which is in your board packet, requesting that the state fund this commitment to veterans in the next biennium. Only in next year's recommendation of the 5.5% increase, only 1.6% of that would fund the growth agenda initiatives, which, again, all our stakeholders have urged us to continue to move forward. Tuition for non-resident undergraduates, non-resident students, and resident graduate students will be the same dollar amount as resident undergraduate students, which is consistent with previous actions of the board. I'm again recommending this year that tuition at the UW colleges be frozen at 2006-07 levels. I'm proud of this unprecedented effort that will preserve points of access for over 12,000 students enrolled at our 13 two-year campuses, and we hope additional students attracted by the college's low tuition and high quality. This freeze also brings the UW colleges more in line with the Wisconsin Technical College system tuition rates for liberal arts transfer students. So it's my hope that you will strongly consider this budget in the context of our shared goals and our shared desire to ensure our institutions remain both affordable and of high quality. I commend you for your commitment in this regard and hope today you'll enable us to keep that commitment by supporting my recommendation. I've asked Associate Vice President Frida Harris to provide you with more details on these recommendations and broader aspects of our operating budget plans for 08-09, and Frida will now do that. Frida.
Thank Today, the board is asked to approve the 2008-09 annual budget and establish tuition and fee rates. The budget for 2008-09 is $4.7 billion, consisting of 25% state funding of $1.2 billion, academic tuition of $981 million, and $2.6 billion of other funds. This budget is a good one for the UW system. It includes new funding of $53.5 million in GPR fee funds, most of which is for new programs and initiatives that will increase the number of students in the system, help grow the number of citizens with baccalaureate degrees, add good jobs, increase the success of students who are enrolled in the system, and increase the capacity to receive external funding. This budget includes more than $30 million of funding for the growth agenda. With this funding, we will add more than 2,000 new full-time equivalent students to the system. We will grow our online enrollments, and we will work on targeted programs to meet regional and state needs. You can find more information on the growth agenda in Appendix B of the annual operating budget. We will receive $3.3 million of new funding to help recruit and retain faculty in high-needs areas. This funding becomes more important as we continue to lag our peers. Most of the faculty at our institutions will only take home a 1% salary increase this fiscal year. The other 2% will not be effective until June 2009, which is after the academic year has ended. The state is providing $2.5 million in one-time matching funds for lung cancer research. The medical school must match these dollars with private gifts in order to expend the funds. Under the proposed budget, tuition would increase $348 at UW-Madison, $340 at UW-Milwaukee, and $265 for students enrolled in the four-year comprehensive institutions. Tuition at the UW colleges would be frozen for the second consecutive year, and tuition for most other students will increase by the same dollar amount as it does for resident undergraduates. The continuing freeze for the UW colleges will maintain a very low-cost entry point to the UW system for more than 12,000 resident students. We are asking that tuition for non-resident graduate students remain at the 2007-08 rate. Non-resident graduate students provide critical support to research activities and provide classroom instruction as teaching assistants at UW institutions, particularly at UW-Madison and UW-Milwaukee. For most of these students, remissions are part of the cost to compete with other institutions, and those remissions have become a significant burden on academic departments. UW tuition for non-resident graduate students is among the highest in their peers. Holding this tuition at the 2007-08 rate will bring us closer to the peer median. Tuition increases will help fund the growth agenda initiatives and the salary increases approved by the Joint Committee on Employment Relations last week. It will also help recover the expected loss of revenue from tuition remissions for the current fiscal year. For the first time, you are being asked to consider increasing tuition to fund veterans' remissions. For the past 3 years, we have covered the cost of these remissions without adding charges to tuition. In 2005-06, the veterans' remissions cost $4.3 million. In the current fiscal year, 2007-08, the cost has grown to $17.5 million. To help manage these costs, the state has set aside $5 million in funding for remissions at the UW system and the Wisconsin Technical Colleges in 2007-08. The UW system expects to receive about $4 million of that, which means that our institutions would need to reallocate $13.5 million in the current fiscal year. However, the UW system had $5.5 million available this year for salary increases that were budgeted at a higher percentage than those that were approved by the Joint Committee on Employment Relations. Those funds will be used to help defray the cost of the veterans' remissions on a one-time basis, leaving $8 million of unfunded remissions. When coupled with the required state lapse from the budget, required reallocations will total $20.5 million in 2007-08. For 2008-09, the budget year we're talking about, the UW system will again need to reallocate $12.5 million for required lapses in the budget, as well as an undetermined amount for lapses under the budget repair bill. The budget repair bill, as the President mentioned, includes an additional $270 million in lapses for state agencies this biennium. Given that, UW institutions will no longer have the capacity to reallocate for veterans remissions without reductions to services for students. We anticipate veterans remissions will cost approximately $23 million in the 2008-09 year, and reimbursements from the state would grow to approximately $5 million, leaving an $18 million shortfall. We are asking you to increase tuition on a one-time basis to cover this amount. We think this funding only needs to be one time because we're asking the state to fully fund veterans remissions in the 2009-11 budget, and the federal government is making progress on an enhanced GI Bill package that would cover additional educational expenses for veterans who have served since September 2001. In 2009-10, with improved funding of veterans' educational benefits, these funds that you would add to tuition would be available to cover the cost of the delayed 2008-09 salary adjustments, that 2% that is effective in June, and increases in health insurance, leading to smoother tuition increases for students. In the area of affordability, you should be aware that tuition at UW institutions will still be among the lowest in their peer groups after the increases we've recommended. Based on what we know of tuition increases for Madison's peers, UW-Madison would continue to be the second lowest tuition in the Big Ten. We are also seeing improvements in the area of need-based aid. As you heard this morning, the Fund for Wisconsin Scholars will begin awarding new need-based grants to students in public post-secondary institutions. The UW-WEG is increasing 10% and will provide additional funding for students attending UW institutions. And as you've also heard, the UW system is beginning a program to increase private need-based financial aid as well. There has been a correction to the materials that were mailed out to you on page 3I to reflect the fact that WEG increases will not provide a dollar-for-dollar increase in funding on average, even though the percentage increase is higher than the percentage increase in tuition. Segregated fee rates, as proposed by the campuses for your consideration, will increase an average $57 at four-year institutions. A large portion of the increases are due to major projects at the campuses. Without those major projects, the seg fees would increase $25 on average. At the UW colleges, segregated fees are recommended to increase $36 on average, primarily due to the addition of mental health services staff. UW colleges were the only institution within the system that had no staffing for mental health services, and they are working to add those services in response to the campus safety report. Room and board rates would increase $256 on average due primarily to new and remodeled facilities at 6 campuses, as well as facility maintenance projects at 2 others and new food service contracts. The operating budget document includes a revision to the annual distribution adjustments document approved in April to reflect the Joker actions last week related to pay plan. The distribution of GPR fee funding by campus can be found in your document on page A1. Later today, you'll be asked to consider differential tuition initiatives at 2 institutions, UW-Superior and UW-Madison. Those differential tuition rates are not included in the rates you're considering right now. Once a decision on those items have been made, the updated rates will be used. At this point, I'd be happy to address any questions that you may have regarding the annual budget.
Regent Loftus.
Thank you. I just want to get perfectly clear what we're doing and what we're not doing with the veterans' tuition and what that means for the base budget. This is presented as a one-time tuition surcharge, and let's use an example. We have a $348 increase in tuition at Madison. How many dollars of that $348 would be the tuition surcharge?
Of the 348...
48.
I would need actually to have someone give me a calculator because I don't have that.
60%.
So 60% of that increase is to pay for the veterans.
That is accurate, yes.
There is no increase at the colleges. They're not participating in the veteran surcharge, or we're lowering the tuition, or what are we doing? How are they participating or not?
They are participating in the Veterans Remissions Program, all of our campuses.
No, I mean, but there's no tuition increase.
We're holding the tuition down, Regent Loftus, at the two-year colleges.
I can't hear you.
Pardon me? Oh, we're holding the tuition down, Regent Loftus, at the two-year colleges consciously because of concerns that we know the board has around access. They are currently the most reasonably priced colleges in the system, great place for students to do their freshman and sophomore work if they choose to do it at lower cost than other places, and then we know they can transfer in. So yes, we are holding them as we did last year, harmless from any tuition increase, but if veterans decide to attend those colleges, they would be able to do it at the frozen tuition rate.
Well, I mean, obviously you have to question a policy that has the students at four-year colleges subsidizing the veterans' tuition, but the students at two-year colleges not.
Aha, you see, but we hope those students at two-year colleges will turn into students at our four-year colleges.
Well, you can hope that all you want, but that's done by whiskey.
We know, we whiskey drinkers know a lot of those students do wind up transferring into our four-year colleges and become students paying the four-year college tuition.
Okay, so if this is presented as a one-time veteran surcharge of that amount that some of the students, but not all of the students, will pay.
Well, again, we have 12,000 students at the two-year colleges. We have 170,000 students in the system.
Thank you. Do you then take that amount of money out of your base budget when that's not in your base when you submit your budget for the next time?
What happens right now is that our budget is structured such that we are to generate a certain amount of money. We currently are not generating that amount of money at our institutions. And what happens is that we then have to reallocate the shortfall in revenue to all of our campuses, which means they have less ability to provide services to the students that they have. What this would allow us to do for 1 year is to take the veterans' tuition remissions off of the campuses as a revenue shortfall, being aware that we not only have the budget requirement for a $12.5 million lapse in 2008-09, but an unknown amount of money that is going to be required of the UW system due to the additional $270 million state lapse. Without that, there would have to be some reductions in services for all of our students. The reason for the college's approach is partly based upon the work of the Tuition and Financial Aid Working Group, where we looked at where the UW system was in relationship to tuition and other places. For our comprehensive institutions and for our doctoral institutions, our resident undergraduate tuition is lower than it is at peers. That is not the case with the UW colleges. So there was a strategic decision to start to make those changes as we could to get to a better market position with all of our campuses, and also to maintain a low-cost access point for the citizens of the state. Does that help?
I mean, a question that students are called on to pay for this at all, and of course we all do, but that we're not going to ask all students to participate. So when you submit your budget, you take this 18 million out of the base. We don't have it in the next
In the next biennium, in 2009-11, we are hoping that the state will fully fund the veterans' remissions. And when they do that, we won't need to have that additional amount related to the shortfall in veterans' tuition remissions, or that the federal program that is currently moving along would reduce the amount that has to come from state resources. The funding then would allow us to keep the tuition increases for 2009-11 lower, because we know that we have a delayed 2% pay plan along with health insurance costs and other things that will be coming in the 09-10 budget. So we're hoping that this will allow a smoother transition between the 2 years with tuition.
Okay. Well, my last comment here in this area is I take it this is the lowest estimate that you could come up with for this program. I mean, this seems to defy reality that the veteran program is not going to grow much more than has been anticipated in the past. I mean, we just passed World War II as far as number of call-ups of National Guard. I mean, is this reflecting the growth in the program in the campuses? You say this is a conservatively estimating that this will be the cost. So this would be the low end.
This assumes a 10% growth in the enrollment of the number of people participating in the program, as well as the 5.5% tuition increase that we are asking you to consider this time. That is a low-end estimate because the programs actually have been growing more at a 20% rate. But between the two, we're hoping that we'll be at a better state, and the 23 million, which is an increase over the 17.5 this year, would be an amount that is reasonable. If not, we'll have to manage with the resources that we have.
Well, I mean, you're in a year where there's no gubernatorial election, and we're not in a budget year. The benefit of lowballing this figure doesn't have a great payoff.
Okay. Regent Smith?
Let me follow up on Regent Loftus's questions regarding maybe the one-time nature of this. First, let me commend, I know President Riley in his comments both today and I think over the last week has been careful too, and I think it's a good thing not to be pitting one group against another, because there's that danger with this, and I think you've done a good job at keeping away from that. Obviously, this is severely underfunded. I don't think it was ever the intent that our system would be picking up these costs, but we are where we are. But this one-time nature, maybe you can give us a little more, Frida, is we talk about the state or the federal government moving forward. What realistically do we think the chances are of this changing, so that we're not back here in the future having the same discussion as we are today?
Let me comment, and then Frida may want to jump in as well. You know, the basic answer is we don't know what the legislature and the governor will be willing to fund. We don't know what, if anything, will make it through the federal process to help fund this. So that's where you have to start. But through the kinds of comments and questions that you all are raising today and we make, and this is going on in other states that are increasingly looking for ways to support veterans' education, we hope that clear messages will be sent to our own legislature and governor, to the federal elected officials who have to decide on this, that this is clearly an area where government has an obligation to invest on behalf of all of its veterans by all the taxpayers. So I guess all I could say there, Regent Smith, is the longer, better, louder we can make that case in the course of talking about these things, the greater the odds will be that this will be a one-time need to use tuition to cover these remissions. Now, we can't guarantee that, but we just need to keep talking about it the way we are to increase the chances that government will step up. And, you know, as I talk to our elected officials, nobody denies that that's the right thing to do. I mean, the will needs to be there, but everybody in the concept says, yeah, taxpayers ought to cover this.
Regent Falbo and then Regent Davis.
I think part of my problem, maybe the others share it, is there's a discomfort. I don't think any of us, I agree with what Kevin said, and that we all want to help, we all want to encourage veterans to enter our institutions. I think we may all agree that we never anticipated, nor do we want the students to pay the freight. In light of the way we're doing it, might it make sense to have a 2.5% tuition increase and the 3% isolated out so that when we do get to the next biennium, that's not even part of the base. And hopefully it will go away. I have a problem that we're going to increase tuition by 5.5%, and if we're successful at getting the state or the federal government to fund those remissions, that we have that 5.5% as our increase as our part of our base tuition in the future. So if it would make any sense, or if it would make anybody feel any better about it, that we do a 2.5% tuition increase and a one-time 3%, whatever you want to call it. I don't like the term surcharge, but
I'd go back to Regent Loftus's question there, and I think, these projections for what the remissions will cost us are pretty conservative. And if we don't get to the 5.5% now, we will spend that money now, and it's not going to come back later, because nobody anticipates that the number of veterans taking advantage of this is going to drop anytime soon.
We have a different definition of what conservative means in budgeting. Conservative to me means that we would have overestimated the cost, not underestimated. But that's just a point of view.
But I think we're agreeing.
But again, I don't know if anybody agrees with me on that. That the 3% would be one time, it goes away. It's not part of the base. It's not part of our base tuition increase. Or if it makes any difference to anybody.
Okay, well, we want to hold that. Regent Davis?
I just have a small question, and it has to do with and I absolutely agree with freezing of tuition for the two-year colleges. And I just want, because I wasn't a part of that task force or committee, how long do we think we're going to need to freeze tuition for the two-year colleges in order to be in the best market position, or what have you? Is that like 5 years from now? Do we have any idea? I mean, I'm not trying to hold us to it, but I'm just trying to wonder.
I think looking at where we are now, we're getting closer to where the two-year technical college tuition is for liberal arts programming. I think probably another year at the most would be what would be needed to have a good market position, and it might not even need to be a freeze at that point. We would reevaluate it over that time, but I can't see that being for probably more than a year.
Thank you.
Regent Pruitt?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to sort of particularly draw attention and commend the notion of this freeze on non-resident graduate student tuition, which, as President Riley, you indicated, I think is critical to sort of attract and retain the best graduate students in the programs. And I know Provost Farrell, when we were in Madison, talked about UW-Madison's challenges in the years to come. You identified this as an important thing. And I wondered if you might offer either any just general comments about this, and then where it might put us going forward, what other kinds of things related to this particular issue you would identify as important in terms of this particular issue.
Well, thanks. Just briefly to remind you, the issue in particular is graduate student tuition, and the reason that impacts us is in competing for the best prospective graduate students expect, and others who are offering them help, will expect to pay a student's tuition, provide a livable stipend, and an opportunity to work with great faculty on really exciting research projects. Well, the last two we certainly have. We have great faculty and opportunity to work on exciting research projects. Stipends we can offer are a little low, but generally competitive. One of the biggest challenges we face, as Regent Pruitt mentioned, is really being able to satisfy the tuition requirements. As most of you know, the bottom line is somehow that tuition has to be paid. So for out-of-state students, we're talking about $29,000 roughly, and money has to be generated to do that. So the higher that amount gets, the more difficult it is for the campus to basically help our PIs, help our faculty find those dollars to pay the tuition. Granting agencies will not pay that. So NSF and NIH will not pay that tuition. Private funding agencies will not pay that tuition. So that becomes a big handicap for us. And so anything that you can do in terms of freezing the tuition at least helps us not get less competitive. Most, as you can imagine, private institutions that we compete with typically have a fairly substantial bankroll in terms of private funding that they can use to offset their tuitions, and that's usually what they do. Other publics have different tuition structures, so often the institution or the individual investigator is not obliged to come up with the tuition dollars. As it happens with our tuition structure, the institution does need to come up with those tuition dollars. So anything we can do to help moderate out-of-state graduate student tuition, since that's the biggest source of our most competitive graduate students, is helpful for us and really fuels the research engine that we in Milwaukee and other parts of the system rely on for the research that we do. So thank you.
Could I just add one comment to Provost Farrell? You know, one way to think about this is we're holding down tuition for out-of-state non-resident graduate students who come. But because so many of them are involved in working for the university as teaching assistants, as instructors, as research assistants, the other way to think about this is we're holding down payments to out-of-staters because most of that money goes back in remissions to these folks.
Anybody else on this side going around? Regent Burmaster?
Given that, as you said, President Riley, our ultimate goal is to send a very strong message to the legislature, the governor, and the federal government that they have to fund this veterans tuition remission program, I am intrigued by what Regent Falbo brought up. And I wonder, Frida, so the $18 million gap, if we weren't adding that $18 million surcharge, in the words of Regent Loftus, on, would the tuition increase be about 3.1, or was it, you said 2? It'd be 2.5?
That is accurate. It would be 2.5.
Is there a way, see, that messaging to the general public, a reasonable tuition increase of 2.5, but because the feds, the legislature, didn't do what they should have, if we can communicate that to the students and parents throughout our state, won't that build the pressure? So isn't there a way to somehow, in our messaging, I'm afraid that this is going to be, in the general public, just perceived as a 5.5% tuition increase. And all the rest of this is going to get lost. And so again, the university's done the right thing. They've made up for the rather irresponsible action of the legislature in not fully funding this. And, you know, so I'm intrigued by your, or however we would go about really capturing that messaging.
So what you're suggesting is a 2.5% tuition increase plus a 3% tuition surcharge.
Well, or whatever, I don't know. I don't want to. I think we should talk about it.
Let's do the surcharge first, so that we're not charging 3% on tuition plus 2.5%, plus on the 2.5% increase. So it would be a 3% surcharge on today's base tuition, and then a 2.5% increase in the base tuition.
Regent Walsh?
Just to yeah.
This is the veterans issue is a very sensitive issue, and I don't think anybody's going to
understand that we're, when we start combining the two, it sounds like we're saying to the other students, you're going to have to subsidize it because they're veterans. And I think they're two separate issues, and we could pick and choose all sorts of increased expenses or decisions we've made, from salaries to faculty pay, that applies the same way. And I just would not combine these two issues. I think it's a mistake. Veterans is a separate issue. It's separate. Separate. Well, I thought you were saying that because they won't fund the veterans, we have to raise our tuition. I thought that's what you were saying.
That's the public perception. I've been getting all kinds of emails. Isn't that everybody's perception?
I don't think that is the reason we're doing it, but I think it's a bad message to send.
I agree with you, and so does Regent Falbo. That's why we were trying to separate these out, because the way President Riley and
I'm sorry, what is I thought you were saying that's the message you wanted to send. I missed that then, when you said that.
No, the exact opposite. I am hearing that as the message, that we have a 5.5% tuition increase. And I know you've done a good job in trying to not pit, but I am hearing from other regents, I think we could be even clearer in trying not to pit that, and just help people to really understand that the legislature hasn't, and that the university has to pay for this somehow. And so if you don't...
That sounds to me like you're sending a message. I'm not blaming the legislature on that. This is tough times. The veterans issue is a separate issue. We want to educate veterans, whether or not we have to pitch in or they have to pitch in.
Nobody would disagree with that. The point is that the general public knows that if the $18 million had been provided by the legislature...
I don't think the general public...
Another complicating factor here, and correct me, Frida, if I'm wrong, but we did get $9 million from the state toward this remissions, right? So it's not like they've stepped away from it entirely.
25%?
We expect that out of the $11.5 million that is being provided, approximately $9 million is going to come. It will be based upon actual remissions from the technical colleges and the UW, how that distribution happens. But yes, they have provided some funding. Even though with that funding, we expect a $40 million shortfall over these 2 years.
So it's a more mixed situation in that sense.
Regent Spector?
I wanted to comment on what Mike and Libby said. I think the main point you made is that if monies come in the future, we shouldn't have this in the tuition just going forward. We should have it out. I think we can accomplish that without doing what you're saying, because by doing what you're saying, we're going to highlight to everyone that we are asking some students to pay for the veterans, and I don't think that's a healthy way to do it. I think that is...
Well, that's what we're doing.
We already know it.
We've explained it. It's in the public. Why do you have to... that's like on the local property tax saying we're going to isolate a certain amount. We're all going to pay for the beach instead of just the people who use it. And the people who use it can't afford... I just think it's not a good way to do business, and you can achieve what you want, because in the future we can ask Frida, if we get $18 million or whatever from another source, that it's presumptively that it will come out of next year's base, or whatever the right term is that Tom was using.
One of the reasons is we're being told this is a one-time deal. The beachfront is year after year. If it's a one-time deal, to me it just makes more sense to have it a one-time deal, and it drops off, isolated as a one-time deal, and it goes away. And if we have to deal with it in the future, we deal with it again separately.
I think it pits one group against another, and it isn't...
It is what it is, though, Mike.
Yeah.
Any other comments on this item? Regent Bartel?
I guess this is for President Riley. I think at the last meeting, the United Council students came. It was the last meeting and the meeting before that, and urged that we not raise tuition at all, that would be a 0% increase. And you may recall that I asked the question of the president of United Council, well, if that means that we have to eliminate faculty and staff if we have to reduce the number of sections or class offerings that we provide, or really in the worst case, if that means that we have to close a campus, what would you recommend in that case? If given those circumstances, what would you say? Would you still say no tuition increase? Well, he didn't have an answer to that, you recall. I mean, he didn't want to sit where we're sitting. He just wanted us to consider a no tuition increase budget. Since that time, I've received, and I suspect other regions have received, compelling messages from students who urging the same thing, urging that we hold the line on tuition, basically telling us their story, that they come from low-income families, they may be a first-generation student, they are working their way through college, working close to full-time, taking a full class load, and if we increase tuition in the amount that has been proposed, that they will have to work another 40 to 60 hours a year in order to pay for that. And that if they graduate, and that's a question, whether they can afford to do it, they will graduate with over $20,000 of debt. And so please don't raise tuition. Now, I know that there are many students in our institutions who can afford to pay the increase that we are proposing with their families or borrowing or however they can do it. And I also know that the tuition that we charge, even with this 5.5% increase, is among the lowest among our Big Ten peers. I guess the question is, what do we say to these students? If they were sitting out here today, the ones that are very concerned about it, who are working their heads off, trying to get through college, what do we say to them about this situation? 5.5% increase will require them to work even harder to support themselves.
Well, I think there are a couple of things to say. Let me start by saying, I think if I had my way in public institutions, there would be no tuition. There used to be at many public institutions in this country. But over time, the taxpayers, voters, have made decisions, sometimes unfortunate, I think, that that's not what we're going to do. And I think all of our students recognize that they don't want access to something that's poor quality. And I think we've passed the time where we can say, oh, you just don't charge anymore and you worry about the quality, and we know you will keep the quality up. We won't keep the quality up. Regent Bartel, currently 40% of our coursework across the system is taught by people not on faculty lines, by year-to-year instructional academic staff folk. They're doing a great job. But is it about 50% where you no longer have a university, you have some other kind of school? I mean, we can always cut more money out, but it will have an effect on the quality of what our students learn and maybe what they earn later on. And I think sometimes, again, we haven't done a good enough job in connecting the value of a college degree and what a student is able to earn. We know that it's projected now that the additional lifetime earnings for a person is about $1 million between somebody who has only a high school diploma and somebody who has a baccalaureate degree. When you think even about a $20,000 loan debt, that sure pales compared to $1 million extra over the course of a lifetime. And we know that's very hard to see when you're a junior or senior in high school or maybe even a sophomore in college. And we need to work more assiduously through some of the financial aid and financial aid communication efforts that we talked about this morning to send that kind of a signal to those students. Again, I'll go back to the numbers. The tuition increase we're recommending with everything in the 5.5% would mean if you're a student at UW-Madison, you'll pay about, $160, $170 more a semester.
Regent Vasquez?
When I was appointed to the Board of Regents, and it became known in my organization, my management team became very alerted to this, and it's amazing how quite regularly they come to me and tell me about, oh, the Board of Regents is going to do this, or oh, the university is that, or oh, the Board of Regents is going to be confronted with this, or whatever. Yesterday, I had a management team, so I consider them to be rather, in a relatively short period of time, rather informed all of a sudden on the university. And yesterday I had a management team meeting, and I reminded them that I was going to be here for the next two days. And my education director immediately said, don't raise tuition. Didn't make any difference. She is very well educated, very articulate, has been reading a lot about what the Regents will do. It was rather interesting. She didn't say, oh, don't raise tuition either only on the operation side, but don't forget about veterans. All she said was, don't raise tuition. I think that's the dilemma that we are confronted with, and that is that no matter what we do, no matter how we divide it, no matter how we split the hairs, there will be people on either side that will be condemning us. And I think that what we need to do at this point is try to move forward in minimizing, at least as best as we can, in creating divisions. I think that the proposal that has been presented at least attempts in not the best way, probably some could even say not the most articulate way, to at least just to say we are moving forward, we have to address an issue, and we're going to try to minimize the highlighting of pitting one group of individuals against another. It's not the ideal, but I think it's the one that could at least minimize that perception that we are pitting one against the other. There's one person here that I really don't envy, and I would not want to be in his shoes, and it's our friend over there, Dave Giroux, who's going to have to explain all of this once all of this passes. We're going to have the same situation when we pass the resolution on veterans. There will be angry people with us, and I would venture to say that there will be even some veterans that will be angry with us because they will come approaching it with certain perceptions. And so my sense is that we are again caught in a situation that no matter what we do, we're going to have people angry with us. My suggestion, as I think I've heard some other colleagues here, is saying we need to move forward, at least my support is that we move forward as it has been presented, because at least it, in a very small, slight manner, says we're not going to highlight pitting one group against the other. Let's not forget that unless we say we're not going to approve, whether it be 2.5 or 3, at the end of the day, we're ultimately probably going to approve something that is going to total 5%. It's just a matter of which way do we want to split it in the debate. We're not going to be satisfying people. They're ultimately going to be angry at us, and many of them are going to take, no matter how we approach it, the approach that my manager's reaction was, don't raise taxes. And I don't think we can say that, or don't raise tuition, and I don't think that's a viable alternative. That would be about the only thing that would make everybody, or at least the majority of people, happy.
Let me call on Regent Smith, and if other people have comments, also if anyone would consider making a motion on Resolution A, so we could have a discussion on the motion, that would be appreciated by the Chair. I'll call on Regent Smith.
Actually, I'll make the motion if I can follow up with a question for Frida.
There's been a motion for Resolution A. Is there a second? Discussion. Regent Smith.
I'm trying to get clear. I've been asking some questions on this base question, whether this becomes part of the base now and how that affects future. Could you just clarify that for us again?
Sure. What would happen is that the tuition that is generated would become part of our base, and it would be used for covering the shortfall in the tuition remissions.
Okay.
However, if the cost of the remissions goes down, either because the state funds it or the federal government picks it up, then the tuition increase that we would need in a future year would decrease. Then that would cover some of the costs of new programming that is coming forward. So it would just allow us to have a smaller increase. An example is the fact that our pay plan was reduced from the 4% that we had proposed last year to the 2% meant that there was a smaller need for pay plan in the current year, which led to the base 2.5 that you're talking about.
Yep.
Okay. Regent Crane, did you have a question or discussion on the motion?
No, I don't think so at this point. I simply was going to I say some of the same kinds of things that Jose has said. I think that a lot of the wrestling with this has already been done, and we all feel discomfort about various parts of this, and I am one of those people who is concerned about quality as well as tuition burden, and balancing those things is very difficult. And I appreciate the work that's been done to seek to do that.
Regent Thomas?
Thank you. I recognize the reality of a need for a tuition increase right now. I mean, I recognize the tough situation that the state is in, that the nation is in right now. But in this conversation, we also have to recognize some of these other factors that other board members have been able to point out in this discussion. First, I'd just like to say that I support the freeze at the 2 years. I think it's essential that we have that access point for place-bound students as well as lower-income families so that they can at least start an education through our system. That's really critical, and that I've heard widespread student support for maintaining that freeze, even if it means other students are bearing a greater burden of the increase. That's one of United Council's platforms right now. Second, I would like to just remind us all again that every time we increase tuition, we exclude students from higher education. And we often talk about where our tuition ranks in the Big Ten, which is close to the bottom. And with that is a statement that's true. I believe that we do offer a tremendous value to our students, and that it helps, that obtaining an education helps a person tremendously throughout their life. You know, a person earns, $1 million more over their lifetime with a bachelor's degree. But the increase in tuition that we will probably approve today will mean that there are many Wisconsin citizens that won't be able to attain that better standard of living because they won't be able to attain the education that would give that to them. So I think we just need to remind ourselves of that. And then I'd like to comment on the veterans remissions. I like this idea of highlighting the difference between our tuition increase and the money that we're going to have to commit in order to pay for that tuition or the veterans payment. And I think it's really important to realize that the nation and the state, through their inaction, and the board through our action on tuition, we're asking students to bear the moral burden of the nation in having veterans that are entitled to benefits, and they are absolutely entitled to benefits for their great service to the country. But we're asking a very small group of people who are already financially strapped to bear that burden, and it's not a good place for this system's charges to be in. And my last point is that I don't believe splitting this percentage up would be pitting the two groups against each other, the veterans against students. I think students profoundly understand the importance of committing to supporting veterans, but I think they also recognize that it's not this small group of people's responsibility to do that. And I don't think the majority of students would view it as pitting one against the other. In fact, I think it is our responsibility to alert the families who are paying these tuition bills that they are being asked to make that commitment.
Regent Loftus?
Well, I'm going to make a motion to divide the question, but before I do that, let's just think, Mr. President of the university, let's just think about our own interests here. We put a 10% growth estimate. We put a growth estimate in this program of 10% in a program that in reality is growing 20%. We could end up with this being the policy from the legislature. In other words, that tuition fund this program. It probably already is. I'm very reluctant on submitting a budget where this is in the base, but it'll come somehow be out of the base if money comes forward. I no history to support that. And the last thing is the federal government picking this up. I have not seen programs where the federal government is proposing to pay tuition directly to universities. I went to college 4 years on the GI Bill. None of the money went to the university.
I think Regent wants
so I agree with Colleen. I don't see what the problem is in splitting this question.
Just a factual comment that I guess, and Frida is shaking her head, I think I'm right. In the proposed federal legislation, the money they're looking at now to help support veterans tuition would go directly to institutions. Am I right, Frida?
That is correct in the Web GI Bill.
Okay, well then I stand corrected because that would be a departure from past and current practice. Well, Mr. President, I would make a motion to split the question to have the first vote on the tuition increase of 2.5%, and if that prevails, then a second vote on the remainder. So I would move.
There's been a motion to split the question. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion to split the question? Regent Crane.
I don't know how this question is split. How would each of these be worded? I don't understand.
I believe he wants to have a motion for 2.5. You don't do that by splitting. You do it either by an amendment or defeating the 5.
I'll accept Regent Walsh's suggestion as a friendly amendment to my motion.
Which says now, what does it say?
To amend to 2.5 tuition increase with no veterans.
Is a motion to an amend?
It's a motion to amend Regent Smith's motion on Resolution A.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a second to the motion to amend?
Regent Feldbo, second.
I would like to know what the motion to amend is. What is it? What is he saying?
Resolution A has been moved and seconded, and there's been a motion to amend Resolution A to call for a 2.5% increase in tuition, whereas Resolution A calls for a 5.5% increase in tuition.
If that fails, if this fails, then we're back to the unamended motion.
If the motion to amend fails, then we're back to Resolution A, which calls for a 5.5% increase in tuition. Regent Walsh.
I'm assuming that if this passed, then there's a subsequent resolution to clarify the total amount of money. But I've got to say something. I'm really troubled by where this is going. I think we're making a huge mistake, and maybe it's in the perception, but we're tying some things together we shouldn't tie together. Our budget is really relatively simple, and I don't think the explanation is very simple. But on the revenue side, at the state of Wisconsin, you have GPR from the state, you have tuition, you have program revenues, you have grants, gifts, and endowments and research overhead. That's the revenue side. On the expense side, we look around. Most of it's faculty and instructional employee pay, and utilities and things like that. And what we seem to be doing here is by looking at the revenue side and we say, well, there's not a positive, there's a negative because it's a remission, and therefore we have to increase another item on the revenue side. Well, that's true in a simplistic way, but the fact is if you want a 4% faculty pay, you got to increase tuition. If you want a 5%, you got to increase tuition. It's like, it doesn't work so simply as this motion is trying to say it works. And I urge you not to say give us 2.5, but if you give us the money, if you don't give us the money for veterans, we'll go to 5.5. Because you really are, in that case, saying to the students, you're paying more because we've made a decision that you should pay for the veterans. We're not making the decision. It's a separate issue. And we've all decided, the country's decided, the legislature's decided that the veterans ought to get a break. Well, we're being asked to share in that break. And I don't think we should say that we're therefore raising tuition because we want the other students to do it. That's just the reality of having a higher utility expense or a higher faculty expense. I urge you not to tie these together because the message is going to get distorted in the media. It's going to be saying to the students, we're forcing you to pay for the veterans. Of course we're forcing them to pay for utilities too, and faculty pay, and other expenses. And I think it's dangerous to try to pick and choose these things because it's not the same cause and effect.
Okay, procedurally, we are debating the motion to amend the motion to approve Resolution A. Regent Davis.
And, for once, I'm listening and listening and listening, and I have to say, with all due respect to my colleagues who want to split, and I'm not in favor of this amendment. I believe that the budget as proposed, any tuition increase, I think Jose said this before, any tuition increase is painful for a whole lot of reasons, most eloquently presented by Colleen Thomas, Regent Thomas, excuse me. But I think that, that's in the totality of the circumstances, that's what the Board of Regents is here to do, to make tough decisions. I think the budget as presented is a simpler message to give. I'm concerned that the split, however it ends up being, is complicated, convoluted, and won't be received the way that the splitting is intended to have it do. So I'm against it.
Any other discussion on the motion that's on the floor? Regent Burmester.
David, of course you're right. What I think is interesting is that you had a student, an elected official, a former legislator, and a businessman telling you that the perceptions we're hearing...
I'm all for those.
Okay. All right. Well,
that makes more sense to myself, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. We're trying to get to the same outcome. The outcome being that, yes, we have to have a tuition increase. Okay? We're not hearing right now that at least I'm not. I won't speak for those of us who are trying to grapple with this. I'm not hearing that no tuition increase. Okay? I'm hearing rate of inflation. Okay? Something reasonable. I'm hearing 5.5 is too high. And it is already out there that part of the problem of why it's 5.5, it's in our own materials, is because the legislature didn't fully fund. Okay?
In part. There's other reasons, too.
Right, but the message that we're hearing, I'm not talking reality or fact, I'm talking perception here. And all I think any of us were trying to do was to have a discussion about messaging this. And so I will concede you know, that if you think the messaging is more likely to be we're pitting students, I was quite convinced by Regent Thomas's, that I think that students and their families, if they understood that this is a one-time 5.5 increase, which we know is too high in these economic times, but we're all going to come together because we know that this is the right thing to do, and then we're going to work toward getting the feds and our legislature to step to the plate, okay? That I was more convinced of that than trying to sell to the general public right now that it's a 5.5% increase when we are doing some other things that are also going to be in the media at the same time. And I think that that's something you have to look at the whole media picture with this. So I think that was the only attempt. But I will concede I will not vote for the split, and I will believe that your explanation of this will be better understood by the public, because that's all we were trying to do.
Well, Mr. President, let's who presented what here? We were presented with a surcharge. We were presented with a split. I mean, I can make a motion that says that 3% of this increase sunsets after 1 year, and we can all vote for 5.5%. But that's what we were presented, a budget that had a one-time surcharge. We're not making this up. In fact, if we vote for this 5.5%, it is being implied to us that part of this will go away after 1 year, but no evidence that it will, because it will be in our base budget.
President Riley, and then Vice President Pruitt.
Two comments. I think Regent Loftus, what we're saying here is we're presenting this as a hoped-for one-time, but we don't. No, we're not presenting it as, for sure, a one-time issue. And I go back to Regent Burmaster's comments and the rate of inflation impulse, which is always very reasonable, I think. But again, let's keep the bigger picture in mind. We're not asking for a tuition increase to fund the $12.5 million lapse that we will be forced to take in this biennium. We're not asking for a tuition increase to fund the $12.5 million lapse we will be asked to take in the next biennium. We're not asking for a tuition increase to fund any of our portion of the $270 million lapse that the budget repair bill just imposed on us. So very often when people talk about rate of inflation, they're assuming your base is what it was last year. We're having a bunch of money taken out of our base because of the hard economic times that the state is in. We're willing to do that and be good players in that.
Vice President Pruitt?
Just to sort of echo, in a sense, Kevin, I think, mentioned a couple things that I was going to say, and I totally appreciate the importance of sending messages. And I think this conversation has sent a message. And I think the motivations behind this amendment are laudable. But I must admit, I am troubled by the precedents that we might set if we were to do this. And I do think we have a responsibility to set the tuition increase. I am concerned. This is a one-time challenge, which we hope will be a limited one-time challenge. But we are going to face, going forward in this university system, lots of one-time challenges. And I think if we were to begin to set a precedence of identifying percentage increases of tuition going forward devoted to particular one-time challenges, we will potentially set this board and future boards on a course that I don't think we want to go.
Could we have a vote on the motion to amend Resolution A? Been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? No. I would say the motion fails. So we have a resolution on the table for, we have a motion on the table for Resolution A. It's been seconded. Any further discussion on Resolution A? Regent Shields.
I think this is, I guess as a student, and I realize this is my last meeting and I've graduated and whatnot, and going out into the real world soon, it's very interesting because now I'm on that side now of, okay, now I have to pay this back, I mean, just when I started, I could use my Pell Grant to pay my tuition at UW-Fox. So I got an associate's degree basically on the Pell Grant. I mean, and then over the last 4 years since I've been at Oshkosh, I've racked up, I would say, about 26 to 30 grand. And it's still tough. I mean, I am a student in poverty right now, at least until Saturday. Then I'll just be in poverty. So I would, obviously I'm going to, say what I've said for the last two years. I will encourage you to vote no and to think about students who are in poverty, where it does get tough to try and find an extra $300. Especially when I have no parental support and I have to do everything on my own. So again, I know where this is going to go, but I just had to put that out there, So I would encourage you to vote no on the 5.5. But I do appreciate the college's freeze. Again, I appreciate Frida's work, of course. But again, I think with the position that I hold, that it wouldn't be prudent for me to vote in favor of this. So.
Any other discussion on the resolution? All in favor of of Resolution A, say aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. The motion carries. President Riley, I don't believe we have anything else for this session. The next order of business is to recess into our committee assignments. All right. Good. Thank you very much.
Then we come back for the vote?
Yes.
What is it, my committee?